Scope rating says private sector debt relief for Africa under the G20 DSSI may help the sustainability of the economy across the sub-Saharan Africa over a long-term period. All of this we're reporting for you every day as economic journalists. And we are at the forefront of reporting and interpreting key data, statistics, and other information that governments, investors, and individuals are armed with for critical decision-making. So for frontier economies in Africa and in Nigeria, communicating economic data is a bit more challenging due to a number of factors. So how do we separate economic news from noise? Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Andrew Nevin. He's a partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria, an advisory firm that supports Nigerian financial media in their profession. Good evening, Andrew. It's good to have you on the show tonight.
Wonderful to be with you again. How are you doing?
My pleasure. It's been a long time. So what are the key elements of an effective communication of key government policies, statistics by the media, especially in these critical times we live in?
Well, I think the first message we want to give is that what isn't helpful is just to repeat what, say, the government puts out, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics puts out in excruciating detail to 3, 4, 5 not 5, but 4 decimal points in many cases, without giving some context and value added to it. So I think that a lot of times the journalists are under pressure. They don't necessarily understand the statistics and the context of the statistics, and so it comes out with really not being kind of, in fact, I won't say not even value added, but value subtraction. We've all seen these articles in the newspaper which say the report came out from the NBS, here's what it said, and here's what it said. We've all seen, for example, headlines which say that the total stock market capitalization of the NSE has gone up by 20 billion, down by 40 billion, but with no real context. I think what the journalists need to do is be better versed in kind of how the economy works and how the pieces fit together, what each of the numbers actually means. And then when there's a story about the numbers, they need to piece it to the larger story about what's going on in the economy.
Why is this very important, Andrew?
Well, I think it's important because in our view, when you have the business journalists who are working very hard and under difficult circumstances, but when they create stories that don't have any value added, it doesn't help the national debate. So, I mean, to give a simple example, when we discuss the GDP numbers, rather than spend endless time just on what the number is in the comparison in Nigeria, put it in context of what the nation is trying to accomplish. So, as a simple example, His Excellency President Buhari has been very clear he wants to lift 100 million people out of poverty. So, when there's a GDP released by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, let's relate the impact of that GDP number. So, for example, it was minus 6.1 from quarter 2 in 2020 versus quarter 2 in 2019. How do we relate that to that objective of poverty reduction? So it's putting these things in that kind of larger context and in things that the government stated it wants to do. And again, I mean, a similar example, not necessarily statistics, but when you repeat a government, not just government, even corporate, when you repeat their press releases and the claims they make, again, put it in context. So if there's a claim about trade or money, what does it mean in the context of poverty, unemployment for the nation? When there's a trade about some of the CBN intervention programs, what does it mean in the context of what we're trying to accomplish?
Do you think that we have adequate, timely, relevant, and well put together data by government agencies? If yes, what improvements would you like to see and why?
Well, I think we've always been big supporters of the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. Certainly, Dr. Kali, I think, is doing as good a job as he can under the circumstances. A couple of issues, though, there. I mean, we saw that the unemployment statistics didn't come out for 6 quarters, I believe, or maybe a little bit longer. They just recently came out. I think that was attributed to budget issues. I mean, there's real pressure on that. So obviously gaps in data are a problem. I think also, I mean, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is well aware we have at least 50% of the economic activity is the informal economy. And I'm not sure that they've said enough about the relationship between their numbers and the informal economy. And then finally, what we said for the National Bureau of Statistics, of course, is we don't believe that putting out some of these numbers, like the inflation number to 4 significant digits, is accurate. Again, it gives the country a false sense of precision. We have the journalists repeating them to four degrees of precision, 4 significant digits. We put out in our bulletins, we always put a caveat that says we're using the official statistics, but just be aware of the informal economy and also be aware that there's a false sense of provision in some of this. So that's the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. I think another group that's worth mentioning here, though, that's been too quiet in our view, of course, is I think it's called NPOP, National Population Council. They don't really have a functioning website. They haven't been commenting on the population question. I mean, even in the ERGP, the population was raised, but yet as a policy issue never addressed. And having an accurate population count is essential. So I don't think that the government has been doing enough on talking about that issue.
Let's talk about data journalism. Why do you think the local media, mainstream media, needs to get right into this right now?
Into the data, Bosun, that's your question?
Yes, data journalism.
Yeah, data. Well, I mean, the data is what tells us what's going on. And of course, now we have not just the government statistics, but there's lots of other sources of data that private sector actors are using. We had a session with journalists yesterday, an educational session. And, we told them, look, if you're going to be a journalist in an issue, you need to be deep in that issue. So if you're talking about poverty, unemployment, GDP, you need to understand what all the terms mean. You need to understand what all the numbers are. You need to understand what the official numbers mean, how they're actually produced. Then you also need to be aware of other sorts of sources that can be proxies for what's going on. So in a way, you need more specialization within the journalism there. So, and then someone in agricultural business area needs to understand, what are all the major crops, what are the levels of production, where are they produced, where are the statistics coming from. I remember, many people, I do quite a bit on Twitter, and one weekend we had quite a Twitter spat over how many, I think, cashews were produced and exported from Nigeria. No one seemed to know, where did. So I think that the thing about the journalists is they're in a position where they're using data all the time, and they should really understand it and how it's produced and whether it's accurate, have a view on it, which means they can't be specialists in everything. Business journalists kind of need to choose the areas where they're going to focus. Another area that's a lot of confusion is about foreign investment. So if you take the foreign portfolio investment, again, there's reports put out, I think, by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics on flows of portfolio investment. Very complicated subject, and sometimes people have made quite large errors in the press describing what's going on. They confused between a stock and a flow, for example. And in fact, at one of the times, NBS came on Twitter and actually made a correction of the journalist. But to understand that area again requires specialization in it from the journalist. So we'd like to see business journalists kind of choose areas where they're going to focus on, and when they manipulate manipulate in the sense of using the statistics, they know what they're talking about. There was earlier this week, His Excellency President Buhari's spokesman came out and said Nigeria was doing better than other countries in terms of the COVID-19 economic impact, because we had a decline of only 6.1%. And the spokesperson cited different numbers, 33%, 20% reductions, US, UK, for example. But there was no context. And some of the, I don't want to make a big deal of it, but the minus 33% the US is not comparable. What that is a annualized number created out of a quarterly change. So it's not comparable to a minus 6 point. But those are nuances that maybe the spokesperson doesn't fully appreciate. But the journalist should have come onto it and said, actually, you've reported this, but these numbers are not actually an accurate story. Here's a more accurate story. But to be in that position, the journalists are going to have to really kind of make an investment in their knowledge building. And PwC, as you know, is committed to this. We have the training for the journalists. We've also do the press awards every year, where we really give large cash prizes to journalists that write in-depth articles.
Yes, Andrew, this is the age of social media. So there's been a pressure here between social media and mainstream media reporting core economy data statistics. So we want you to talk about that when we come back after the break. Stand by, Andrew Nevin, the chief economist and partner at PwC. We'll be right back after the break. Let's continue this conversation with Dr. Andrew Nevin, who is a partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Thank you so much, Andrew. We appreciate your time. hanging in there with us on the program today. Let's go straight to this conversation. How important is the mainstream media in disseminating economic and financial information in a frontier or developing economy such as Nigeria?
Well, I think certainly, I'm someone that contributes to the media and consumes a lot of the media. For me, it's incredibly important. I review it every day. I think one of the nice things about Nigeria is that the media, at least that I consume and interact with, are all run by Nigerian organizations. It's a little bit like the banking sector. So, in a lot of parts of Africa, the banking sector is run by foreigners. Our banking sector is run by Nigerians. Our media, as far as I can tell, is run by Nigerians. And I think they're an incredibly important part of any society, but particularly in Nigeria. We have a need for openness, for transparency, and that's what journalists are there to do.
So we go now to the very important part of this, social media. They want to be the first, they want to be fast, and they want, but again, we used to talk about what we call the Bloomberg 5 Fs, the first, the fastest, the factual. That's where the point is, the factual. And the final word when it comes to economic journalism. So how significant is the inroads that we've seen in social media in communicating economic news and data? As opposed to mainstream media,
right.
That is.
Well, I think the world has moved on. To me, we don't have social media, mainstream media. It's all one media now, and you've got to blend all of these pieces together, right? So, people know me. I like the Twitter platform. I like the immediacy. But you link the Twitter to longer articles. You blend those things together. You link it to clips. Link it to your show. So, your show is. You could call this traditional media in the sense of being television, but the truth is a lot of the distribution is through other platforms. The successful media companies are combining all of these platforms. They've got to be able to, as I said, use the platforms that have kind of instant attention like Instagram and Twitter, combine them with these more in-depth things, and the people that do that better are going to get the attention. But you can't, especially with economics, in some ways it can be a very boring subject. So you need to lead with things that are interesting, that grabs people's attention and gets them involved in reading or watching or listening to the deeper content, the more analytic content. But I think one of the things I find in my Twitter feed, and those who know me know it's quite open, sometimes quite contentious about some of these issues. But Nigerians, at least the ones who participate in public life, but in these dialogues, they're very passionate. They're very interested in their country and its challenges that Nigeria faces. So you have very active traditional media. The traditional media gets response on social media. Those things interact. So I think it's a healthy ecosystem right now.
So if you try to get economic news and financial news that are reliable, would you touch on the doorsteps of social media first, Andrew, or mainstream media?
Well, it's interesting. I read everything and try to make a judgment about that. I'll put a big plug on the show for the Boki FX site, which obviously tracks something that's very important for Nigerians, which is the parallel market rates. But what it also does is actually bring a lot of news outside of paywalls and makes it available. And a lot of topical things. They do a really good job in choosing it. Again, not to leave out anyone I leave out is also doing a good job. Nairametrics, I think, does a very good job in Nigeria. You're perhaps the top business journalist in the television on that. Listening to you when you are going through the stories around the continent, very succinct, very fact-based, very high value added to people. So people are gravitating to people that give good content. But you always need to come in. But something I think Arise, if I understand right. There may be quite a few people watching this live, but there are many more people who are going to watch it on YouTube feeds and other mechanisms for Rise. So the only successful media companies now combine all of these elements. That's, the traditional media model of something like this, paid advertising on television is collapsing as we speak. So the media companies need to have they need to be able to pay to get good journalism, to get people like you to do it. So they need to combine all these kind of different platforms to be able to get enough revenue to do that. But I think Arise does a very good job on that.
We appreciate your time today, Dr. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Do have a great evening.